I think it's really fitting to be here tonight for a number of reasons. I was really happy to help out with the launch of this James Connolly reader, partly because we've always said all over the 30 odd years of the James Connolly Society that the best way for people to get to grips with James Connolly is to read James Connolly rather than to listen to our interpretation or anyone else's interpretation. So I think producing a book like this, James Connolly's writings, is really valuable and really important in terms of bringing Connolly's relevance right to the forefront, and any opportunity we get, I think, to get Connolly into the hands of people and get them reading him and listening to what he was all about is vital, I think. And of course this year is also the 150th anniversary of James Connolly's birth here in Edinburgh, so there's been a whole series of events going back all over this year, but probably actually launched Connolly 150 June last year, so for a long time. This year alone I've done over 100 meetings, whether lectures or panel talks or outreach sessions, mostly in working class communities, mostly in Edinburgh, but across Scotland, some in England, some in Ireland as well. So it's been a really busy time, but it's also been a good opportunity for us to reflect on Connolly, but also Connolly City and the work that we've done. And I think also we're sitting here and we remember times where very ideally having a meeting on James Connolly on a Friday night in Edinburgh would have meant with incredible hassle, either loyalists or fascists, but also repression for the state. And some of the battles that we had to fight over the years were fought in the streets round about where we're sitting just now. So it's important, I think, to recognise how nice this is to be sitting on a Friday night in the bookshop talking about James Connolly's writings. It's perfect, and that's exactly where we always wanted to get to. And it's also, I think, important where we are. We're just almost in the middle between where James Connolly had his cobbler shop at Buccleuch and South College Street, where he had the flat during one of his most intense periods of political activity in Edinburgh. So it's important, I think, to remember that Connolly's life and his political development as well began here in Edinburgh. Often everything's viewed through the prism of Easter Rising, and as I've said before, his life's almost lived backwards. So it's important for us to recognise the political development that happened through his life and the part Edinburgh played in that. And he also, I do like quoting necessarily James Connolly, but I've got to quote one bit to show how much he loved Edinburgh. James Connolly said, "The population of Edinburgh is largely composed of snobs, flunkies, mashers, lawyers, students, middle class pensions and dividend hunters. Even the working class portion of the population seems to have imbibed the snobbish, would-be respectable spirit of our betters, and look with aversion upon any movement running counter to conventional ideas."
Never changed.
So, Shaun, welcome him.
So is everybody okay with us not using the mic?
Yeah.
All right, yeah. So first of all, thanks for that wonderful introduction, Jim. And it is great to be in the city of Connolly's birth to celebrate Connolly's life, and also to encourage people to engage with James Connolly on the basis of the political questions of the day. I should also thank the Lighthouse bookstore for agreeing to host this event. So I think, are we going to have a wee conversation?
Yeah,
and kind of, so we've practiced this earlier, so Jim's heard me say this over and over again. So I guess I'll just say a wee bit about the book and about why Haymarket agreed to publish it and why we moved forward with it. We were initially planning to do this, to have it come out in 2016. There was actually a few meetings I spoke at where there was, it was about James Connolly and the Rising, but there was no book, unfortunately. But I think it's better that it came out for the 150th anniversary, because there was a lot of great material that came out for 2016, talking about the significance of the Rising, debating the Rising, and talking about its relevance for today. And of course James Connolly was included in that conversation, but because it was such a big event and a global event and there was many players involved, I think Connolly, the uniqueness of Connolly and his actual contribution would have been more lost if it had came out at the time. So I think that this has been a great opportunity to really focus in on what Connolly stood for. And of course Connolly is an icon in many places. In Ireland, of course, here in Scotland, he's celebrated in the United States. There's actually statues to Connolly in Chicago and in Troy in the United States, a huge big statue in Union Park in Chicago. And so he's, and it's primarily for his role in the Rising, and he should be celebrated for his role in the Rising. but often that's as far as people get when they talk about James Connolly. And it's no accident. The conservative state that was born out of the revolution and then counter-revolution almost 100 years ago now, the people who came to rule that state wanted nothing to do with the kind of vision that James Connolly had fought for all his life. The new state was a conservative state, and Connolly's radicalism really didn't fit in with it. So Connolly had to be narrowed down. He had to be turned into something that was acceptable to the new ruling elite, and that so having him as an Irish martyr who died for the cause of Ireland and maybe had some association with the labour movement or with socialism in the past, but he really gave up a lot of that when it came to 1916, and they turned Connolly into they sanitised him and turned him into a martyr. And so I think now, given that we live in very, very turbulent times, with the rise of Trump, with the rise of the far right, with a question of, with Brexit inadvertently renewing a discussion about the partition of Ireland, I think it's a great opportunity, and it's a needed opportunity to really talk about James Connolly's vision, and that's what I hope we're going to do a bit of tonight.
And I think also, if we could say maybe a bit about your coming to Connolly in the States, when you were in the States, because I think that's quite interesting, that having an appreciation of Connolly as that sort of Irish national martyr and the pantheon of the Irish martyrs, right up there with Patrick Pearse's Zeus, is interesting, and that's how we all come to him initially, in terms of, even in Scotland, the Irish community, that's how you know James Connolly. But then delving deeper and sort of engaging critically with his writings, and you had that experience not in Ireland but in the United States, where Connolly obviously lived and played a crucial role in the IWW, with campaigning for people like Eugene Debs. I mean, that's a fascinating inroad into Connolly as well, which again shows the sort of breadth of his interests.
Yeah, I was telling Jim this earlier, and I mean, I as a teenager, I went to the United States. I got recruited to a college there to play soccer, and I played football there for a couple of years, football, I mean. But I got more and more involved in political activity there, trade union organising. I tried to organise a hotel when I graduated from school. That didn't work well, but I learned a lot of stuff. And then I joined the Teamsters Union at UPS, and there was a big rank and file reform movement there. And we had a tremendous big strike back in 1997. And I was at a Labour Notes conference, and I was in a conversation with someone who asked me about James Connolly, what I thought of them, and they ended up suggesting that I read Socialism Made Easy, which I'd never read, never knew anything about, and I didn't actually know that much about James Connolly, and maybe because I came at it more through my dad was a trade unionist in the Northern Ireland Electricity Service, and I think I came at it more from a trade union socialist point of view. So Connolly, because of the way he was described politically, was with the nationalist movement or the Republican movement, so I didn't engage a lot. So I read Socialism Made Easy, and I was very, very impressed, and of course that opened the door then to James Connolly's life. And he did make a significant contribution, I think, to the left in the US, and he was certainly part of some of the best moments of US radicalism. Something I think we should attempt to reclaim as well, and ideas that he brought back with him to Ireland. He joined the Wobblies in 1905, and this was an organisation that was inspired by the great mass strikes, the revolution in Russia in 1905. And the Wobblies were an alliance of people from trade union backgrounds, from the United Miners Federation, from the socialist movement, from a religious background, Mother Jones, anarchists, syndicalists, who united to form a new organisation on the basis that the kind of craft unionism of the American Federation of Labour wasn't fitting and wasn't meeting the needs of the US workers. And of course, the Wobblies set out to organise all workers, unskilled workers, precarious workers, immigrant workers, female workers. It didn't matter what your sexuality was or the colour of your skin. The Wobblies set out to organise them, and this was also a debate that Connolly, I think, was involved in the broader socialist movement. If you think back to the debate that happened at the International Socialism Congress over whether or not the French socialists should join a bourgeois government, Connolly and the American socialists were united against this, and I think that they'd seen in those early years as the socialist movement grew, the split beginning to occur between people who seen themselves as revolutionaries and people who began to believe that there was a reformist road to socialism. And I think that culminated in the argument that the main way now for the socialist project to move forward is to win as many seats in the Reichstag, in the Dáil or in Westminster, and then we'll elect a socialist government and we'll bring about fundamental change. And what the 1905 strike did, and this is why I think people were inspired in the US, was that it really demonstrated that fundamental change was going to come from workers' own self-activity and from below. And so while Connolly all his life was in favour of building political parties, he stood for election many, many times. I think that the Wobblies attracted him because they put the emphasis on, as he's seen it, workers have to do it themselves. Change is going to come through working class revolutionary activity. And of course, he also believed if a socialist was elected to any parliamentary body, their main role wasn't to go in there and manage the system for capitalism, but to go in and be a disturber of the political peace, as he put it. And I think that as the socialist movement today in the United States and Ireland and potentially in Scotland and other places becomes more popular, I think that message to people about the dangers of getting elected and what you think you might be able to do your platform, but Connolly's message that what we really need is people to be rebels wherever they are, whether you're elected to Parliament, whether you're elected to leadership of a trade union movement or a community organisation or a student group. We need to have more rebels that are amplifying struggles and attempting to lead struggles, not seeing change coming through simply through Parliament. So, I think Connolly went to the US as a very experienced socialist already, but I think that as an organiser of the Wobblies and with the emphasis on workplace organising, day-to-day issues that were confronting working class communities, I think it did deepen his understanding of change coming from below, and that was very important. And of course, very differently from some Irish leaders, Connolly didn't think that the US establishment or the Irish professional classes had really anything to offer for the massive Irish community that lived in the US, or the much bigger migrant community, and by extension the broader working classes. Connolly spent all his time often in poverty in the United States, but working amongst migrants. He campaigned across the United States for Eugene D. Debs in 1908. He did a whole tour across. I think he visited 25-30 states, and his goal was to win American and Irish American workers away from support for the Democrats and the Republicans, and to join the socialist movement. And I think that's very, very important. Elizabeth Gurley Flynn talks about, she says Connolly was the first person I ever heard mentioning the word Workers' Republic, a unique idea. But she also talked about how, he would be standing outside of political events selling the newspaper of the Irish Socialist Federation, and that he was despised by the wealthier sections of Irish America. So I think we should be proud of that that Connolly was a rebel involved in working class communities. And then of course when he comes back to the US in 1910, he joins up with another great hero of the Irish working class, born in Liverpool, Jim Larkin, and the Transport Workers Union becomes in many ways an organisation that's quite similar to what the Wobblies were attempting to do in the US as well.
Just to jump to the book for a second, which you should probably be having the book's also got a wonderful introduction which takes you through Connolly's life in chronological order, and then there's a set of writings which again go through in chronological order, and we can see the development of Connolly's thinking. And one of the things that he came across as a sort of battle with other socialists in the United States but elsewhere as well was about the role of women. Connolly was a big feminist and really convinced all the time that women should be playing an active part in the socialist movement and society generally, and as we've seen by the events in Glasgow this week, that's still battles that have to be won. And you've got the section on women in the reader as well, and I think that's really important. So maybe say a bit about how you decided to put readings together in that chronicle order with the introduction, and then maybe a bit about how he thinks about women and how the importance of that.
Yeah, I mean, there's, you know, this is not the only collection of Connolly's writings. There's many great collections out there, and there's you know, a lot of wonderful writing about James Connolly, and there'll be a lot more. I think that this is my contribution to it in the 150th anniversary. So I think people should go off and read Connolly wherever they can find him. I mean, if you don't want to get this collection, you can go to Marxist.org and you can read him there, and that's a great way to kind of familiarise yourself with Connolly's writings. And what I attempted to do was really, I mean, there's always a danger when you have a political perspective yourself that you want that represented in the person that you're writing about. And I would probably argue that I do that to a certain extent. And I think I do it. What I would argue is that I think Connolly was a revolutionary. He was a revolutionary. He was a Marxist. He was a socialist. He was an anti-imperialist. He was a Republican. He was all those things. And what I would argue is the main thing I would claim about Connolly is he was a revolutionary from when he joined the socialist movement here in Dundee in 1890, and he was a revolutionary when he was executed by the British Army in 1916 for participating in the Rising. And I think anybody that believes that you need rebellion, you need resistance, and that if you're for a revolution or revolutionary change, I think we can claim James Connolly and see him as something who's very important. I also think the thing is that it's possible to explain Connolly's participation in the different struggles that he was involved in through what he actually wrote. And I think that that's often what's missing. People see him participating in the Rising and they ask, why did he participate in the Rising? Did he participate because it would be a blood sacrifice? Of course. What was his perspective in opposing partition? What was his perspective in opposing in the Dublin lockout? What was his perspective organising as a socialist in Belfast? You know, in the years during the leading up to the Home Rule crisis. And so I think you can actually find answers to all those questions in his own writings, because he wrote a lot. Connolly wrote very well. He wrote in a really direct manner that was popular. Working class audiences could understand exactly what he was saying. And Connolly's arguments, I think, were often tied to a perspective of action. He didn't write often from afar. I mean, he did write commentary, but they were often his writing is geared towards a particular set of arguments that he believes are necessary to move a struggle forward. And so, on the question of women, I mean, I was a socialist who was told by other socialists that Connolly, Larkin and others were not very good when it came to women's rights. And I believed this for many years until I actually read a bit more about James Connolly and discovered something else, which was that Connolly was actually very sympathetic to the women's plight, but not just sympathetic. He was a supporter of the suffrage movement. He encouraged women to organise in trade union movements, in autonomous, women's only trade union movements, if necessary. He encouraged his female comrades to participate in all the movements that made up the various strands of resistance that were developing in the years heading up to 1916. He encouraged his comrades, his female comrades, his women comrades, to participate fully in the Rising, armed with guns. And I think if you read he has a chapter in The Reconquest of Ireland, which is a pamphlet that he wrote in 1915, and it's often described as one of his least great pamphlets, but it has a great chapter in there on women. And I think what he does in that is he shows a deep appreciation of what women have faced globally, but also particularly in Ireland, a colonised nation, where women, where the issue of where he tries to discuss the issue of women's oppression in relation to capitalism and colonialism. I think it's a fascinating chapter, but he also then goes right through it and talks about why it's so important that the women's rebellion is happening, that there's a rebellion happening by women right now. You know, this is over 100 years ago, and he's talking in these terms about the women's rebellion and celebrating it, and talking about how it can actually have a galvanising impact on broader struggles of the working class. And he makes the argument, look, it's up to women themselves to decide what a fetter is. So if women or other oppressed groups in society face obstacles to full participation and inclusion, it has to be up to those groups themselves to decide what it is they need to get off their backs, and then it's the duty of the rest of the socialist movement and the working class movement to back their struggle. And he kind of synthesizes the women's struggle and then the overall struggle to end capitalism. And I think it's just a fantastic insight onto how Connolly was thinking. Now, I think that maybe he didn't start out with all those ideas. He was surrounded by a lot of amazing female revolutionaries. Winifred Carney went on to play, an important role in the years after Connolly's death. Constance Markovitz as well, of course, and many, many other, rebels. And for no reason, and this is why he was described as by Hannah Sheffington as the staunchest feminist of all the Labour men, which I think is a great tribute to James Connolly, and it gives you an insight into what he, what kind of organising and what, how he must have been involved in and supportive of all those different struggles. So I think, given we've just had a women's rebellion in Ireland for the right to choose, we can connect that repeal struggle to something Ireland's leading socialist was arguing 100 years ago. So I think that that's a very important link that we can draw out and actually, have more discussion of. I think it's important for people to know as well that he was much better than he's given credit for in terms of that issue.
And also I think it's important for people to understand that just that breadth of interest and commitment that Connolly had to a revolutionary approach, that every situation was judged in terms of revolutionary strategy and what was going to advance the movement. And also, I mentioned South College Street, when Connolly was living here in the 1890s, and he was one of the main organisers at the time of the various socialist organisations which sort of moved in and out each other, and the women's section used to meet in his flat at South College Street, and I've often heard people say the flat was a hub of all socialist activity, even the women's section met there. But the clear implication is that Lily was hosting the meeting with them. So we need to rethink that as well in terms of Lily, his wife's contribution, not as being James Connolly's wife, but being a political activist in her own right. And I think that's very important as well, to understand her commitment to him and his commitment to her was very much the word partnership in terms of political activity. I wonder if we could just, because we've not much time, if we could move on maybe to the you mentioned the Rising, and one of Connolly's key sort of theoretical developments was this idea of marrying nationalism and socialism. He's saying they're no antagonistic but complementary, especially if you're approaching it from a revolutionary perspective. And in Scotland here, obviously, we've been through independence referendum, there's now a campaign for a second independence referendum. Every political issue is viewed through the prism of the national question. In Ireland, Brexit, which we mentioned Brexit, everybody probably wants to fall asleep, but we mentioned Brexit because Brexit has opened up all of these questions, particularly partition. And as you say, partition was something Connolly wrote about, although he'd been executed before it came in. He'd seen it come in, he was clear about the outcomes, and now we're in a situation where out of nowhere, in terms of after all the years of guerrilla warfare or whatever, out of nowhere Brexit has made it front and centre. So we now have a situation where even Leo Varadkar is saying, well, if Brexit goes really bad, maybe we need to have an Irish unity referendum. So if Fine Gael are saying that, you can tell that the ground shifted. So how does Connolly feed into the debates that are happening in Ireland, and how should we in Scotland make sure that Connolly and his understanding of why it is absolutely crucial that we don't just talk about changing flags, but that we talk about economic independence as well for the working class?
Well, yeah, I mean, Connolly was writing back in the mid-1890s that if we simply have a change of flags in Ireland, if we have independence, and we don't have a workers' republic as well, Ireland will still be ruled by England, it'll still be ruled by capitalism. So I think that that's a lifelong perspective for James Connolly right up until 1916. And I think that there's a number of different ways now where Connolly's arguments and his vision have become are relevant. I mean, if we start out with partition, Connolly was against partition, like many people were, but Connolly had a unique argument, I think, as well about partition that he was absolutely right about. Connolly says that the labour movement at the time should do everything possible to stop partition, up to bearing arms if necessary. Now, this was after Connolly and others assumed that there was going to be a Home Rule Ireland, and Connolly was getting ready for a changed situation, a battle over the new Ireland, which I think the Dublin lockout was all about. That battle is about nationalist elites versus the rising struggle of the working classes, represented by the militant Transport Workers Union. But Connolly, because Connolly believed that both that the working class struggle was the key way to both end British Empire in Ireland and establish a socialist workers' republic. The idea that the working class would be divided down the middle, Connolly described it as a carnival of reaction. It would bring about that both north and south. And what he meant was that if the working class is the revolution-making class, if you slice it in half, it's going to be a lot weaker. And that means that the elites, the bosses, whomever they are, and he was talking about in the north, unionist, orange elites would be able to beat the orange drum to terrify Protestant workers in the business that down south there's Rome rule and you'll be persecuted, and also to use that ideology to demoralise and marginalise the Catholic minority, while down south the green nationalist elites were able to use patriotism and the Catholic Church to control the population. And of course we ended up out of partition, or out of the counter-revolution. We ended up with two very reactionary states, and we've lived with that now for over 100 years. And so, in the south, I think we can be optimistic now about some of the changes that are happening in Ireland. If you think about what's happened in the last 5 years, we went from a situation in the south where Ireland, as a result of the economic crisis, was devastated with austerity, loaded up with like massive levels of debt by the EU, and it was very slow to see struggle coming out. And then all of a sudden, the water charges movement happened, and you have some of the biggest demonstrations in Irish history. In the midst of that, then a referendum legalises marriage equality for the LGBTQ community, and this was something I think people wouldn't have believed was possible 2 years before, 5 years before, but all of a sudden it's happening in a country that a lot of people looked upon as being very conservative. After that, then we have the referendum on repeal, where women really lost out in the counter-revolution in Ireland, were forced back into the kitchen, back into the home, and weren't supposed to have a public role in society. So the shackles of that is being thrown off as we speak. But I think that there's a whole section of the Irish society right now who feel emboldened and who feel change is possible. And you look at what happened with the housing occupations, led by young people who were then in our occupied houses, and then the response to that was magnificent, and it's really shifted the debate about the housing crisis in the south. And of course, this is all happening and having an impact on the north as well. The border doesn't block the impact of those struggles. So people in the north who were already campaigning for all the same kind of issues do feel emboldened. I think the process of change in the north is going to come a lot slower, unfortunately, because we live in a very dysfunctional state, and we still live in a very, very sectarian state where that's been reinforced because of the Good Friday Agreement. But I think we're going to reach a point in the north where it's a tipping point for reform as well. So where does Connolly become relevant? If you think, I think there's the beginnings of 32 county activism across Ireland. When it comes to the women's rights movement, it's very, very clear. It's the same with the LGBTQ organising. It's the same with the housing issue. And you think about issues like climate change, you have to have an all-Ireland strategy to deal with climate change in Ireland. It can't stop at the border. And then, in Derry last week, there's a toxic dump in Bridgend in Donegal, which is just over the border, and there's a toxic dump in Maboy, and we had a rally in Derry that brought those two issues together. So there is a growing sense that the only way we can deal with these issues is by uniting them across the border. And then there's also how Brexit has really, I think, happened at the same time as this developing 32 county activism. And what has Brexit done? Because there's a fear of a hard border, which nobody supports across Ireland. I think that the DUP probably think now they can maybe use it to strengthen partition, but the vast majority of people don't want to go back to a hard border. but it's also opened up a discussion about the role of the border in general. And if it is the case, and if many more people feel alienated by Westminster, that's going to lead to more people saying, well, maybe we should actually have a referendum that gets rid of partition altogether. And so if there's the opportunity soon, if Catalonia has the right to have a referendum on its constitutional status, I think people in the north of Ireland should be able to do that as well. Scotland has the right to do it. I think people in the north of Ireland should be able to do it as well. But that campaign, I think, we've looked at the Catalonian independence campaign, we've looked at the Scottish independence campaign, and I think you can see that there will be a more general campaign for a new Ireland of some sort that will attempt to reach out to every section of Irish society, be they big unionist farmers who benefited from the RHI scandal, to the corporate elites in Ireland that will attempt to make the argument that a united Ireland, an Ireland without partition, will be great for everyone. And then there's going to have to be a different kind of campaign, and that's where I think Connolly's vision of a workers' republic becomes very, very important, because Connolly's argument was that if we want to appeal to the Protestant working class in the north, we can't just tell them that a new Ireland is going to be very, very similar to the Ireland that you're living in, except it'll have a different flag, maybe a different currency. He says we have to appeal to people on the basis that their life can potentially become a lot better. So I think that I would look forward to the opportunity to campaign for Socialist Ireland, or a new Ireland that is about putting the interests of the vast majority first. And it's interesting as well, see, in doing the tour or in talking to people about the book, there's been quite a few people who came to the meetings and said the first time I engaged with Connolly was 67, 68, which was another period of kind of global turmoil when the social order was challenged, when people began to search around for a vision of something else. And if that starts happening, hopefully that will start happening now, where people will begin to look to Connolly again about what did he stand for, and then his strategies for change as well.
I think there's a campaign in Ireland for an all-Ireland referendum to allow people of Ireland, the 32 counties, to determine their own future without outside interference or impediment. And it seems to me if people of Scotland have got that right, and the people of Ireland have got, and that's a peaceful and democratic, perhaps way out of the occupation and partition. And also, I was taken by what you said there about all of these ideas being ideas that Connolly developed early and he took on through his life. That quote about changing flags is actually, I'm paraphrasing John Leslie, who lived at Blackfriars Street, who was a bit older than Connolly, once sort of a mentor to him. And because he'd said exactly the same sort of thing, they're putting a green flag above Dublin Corporation, he said, shouldn't be the alpha and omega of the struggle. It's about economics as well, about working class. And that leads me into the other thing that's been mentioned a couple of times, Connolly's idea of a workers' republic, which a lot of the time is sort of brushed over. People say, oh, Collins a Republican, or Collins was this, or Collins. But he was always consistent in saying it was a workers' republic. And that is a very particular time state that he's talking about. It's not the same as an Irish republic, it's not the same as an independent Ireland, a workers' republic. And these are ideas that I think had developed through his fascination with the Paris Commune. And a lot of the communards were exiled to Edinburgh and were part of the sort of social milieu that he was involved in when he was involved here in politics. So you just want to say a bit about that, about why, if we're going to have an independence referendum, whether it's in Ireland or whether it's in Scotland, it's absolutely vital, if we're talking about Connolly, that's what we're talking about. He said himself, it wasn't worth crossing the street just for independence. It had to be about a workers' republic and about working class people.
Yeah, I mean, this is where, you think about Connolly's lowly beginnings, and of course he never escaped poverty for all of his life, but he did, I think, make a great theoretical contribution to the international socialist movement that probably isn't appreciated enough. And maybe the different things that you are doing and I'm doing and others are doing can draw out the significance of Connolly's contribution. So when he goes to Ireland in 1896, he forms with a small number of Dublin socialists, the Irish Socialist Republican Party, and I think within a couple of months they have a new manifesto, and there's a new set of ideas about how fundamental change can come about in Ireland, and he argues that the project of the new party is to muster all the available revolutionary forces for the simultaneous defeat of the British Empire and capitalism through the establishment of a socialist workers' republic. And so in one sweep, Connolly synthesises what were maybe seen as two different struggles. Socialists didn't touch the national question because, hey, we're internationalists. And nationalists, of course, covered many different types of nationalism, from conservative nationalism right through to radical republicanism. And so Connolly attempts to synthesise those issues. And I think that and it wasn't just, he didn't just do it because it would be I think he believed that the only way that both those things could happen would be through a risen working class struggle. So he was always against the idea that the working class should somehow wait until a better day for their struggle, or wait until after Ireland is independent and then we can begin the struggle for socialism. He was always about that the day-to-day struggles of the working class are the things that will make up the mobilisation that can lead to an independent Ireland. So when you think today about the struggle for women's rights, the struggle for marriage equality, the struggle for housing, these are all the things that can lead to an end of partition and the establishment of a different kind of Ireland. I think the early years of Connolly's political development were here in Scotland, when he read Karl Marx, William Morris, Friedrich Engels, and he went to small educational classes. But I think that those ideas are what set him up to make those kind of theoretical contributions. This is somebody who never went to, didn't really go to secondary school, certainly didn't go to university, but was a brilliant strategic thinker, a brilliant theoretical thinker, a brilliant writer. We were chatting a bit about this today, but Connolly in a lot of ways represents like what the working class can kind of aspire to, in terms of like every cook can govern kind of thing. Connolly is really the embodiment of that, and the embodiment of the idea that working class people, when he had many names to describe who he was talking about: the dispossessed, the disinherited, the downtrodden, the mob, of course. All hail the mob. That they could actually not only bring about fundamental change, but also create a new social order, a new civilization, as he described it, that would be based on equality, justice, and where the idea that human beings, working classes, create all wealth is at the cornerstone of that new society. So Connolly was very much about the idea that and this is where then there's a, when you think about what the Wobblies were arguing about, the Industrial Republic, about bottom-up control of society over the workplace, over the economy, over the different branches of the economy, over your community. I think that that's the kind of vision that Connolly had about what social society would look like, and where it's the self-activity and self-agency of the vast majority of people that are at the centre of that.
I just want to open it to questions, but just before, because we're tight for time, I should mention that we've done an interview today for the All Hail to the podcast, and that'll be out on Monday, available iTunes, Spotify, all platforms. I should get that in there. So that'll be that. Questions, comments. Got a little time.
Thanks very much for the talk. I suppose maybe just in terms of things that caught my attention, like this might sound a bit harsh or whatever, but maybe in a critical aspect, I kind of find it tenuous or not fully substantiated to be able to say, Connie's ideology would lead him to be of a particular view in relation to questions like abortion or even gay or marriage equality, in the sense that Connie was a man of his own time as well in terms of social questions, and in terms of being able to look at Ireland 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, and the idea of very much women kept in the home type of scenario in his own kind of personal life as well. I know obviously he favoured and supported women who were in the citizen army being very much to the fore, but in terms of Lily and her position, she was very much based in the home throughout, and Connie didn't really seem to be in the home. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that, like, you know, he could bring money in for the family, but I don't know if he would have been opposed to that type of thing at the same time. And then maybe something that I kind of picked up on in the last couple of years, particularly around the centenary in Ireland. I think the establishment has been quite happy to paint the rising and the struggle for national liberation and the struggle for aspects within the Republican movement for socialism, and they kind of papered over it, and they use the women, they misuse the issue of women to basically kind of shy away from wanting to talk about anti-colonialism and wanting to talk about greater economic equality. And that would just be, I suppose, the criticisms that I would have of how commemorations have been carried out and how the public generally is looking back on aspects of Irish history. It's seen now almost, you know, rather than national liberation being the first and foremost thing, it's more this kind of like social thing that can be branded by or other corporations. And I think Connolly would himself have a lot of criticisms of how modern day social movements have been co-opted by massive corporations to further basically a capitalist agenda. So,
sure. I mean, yeah. I mean, we can't. It's impossible to say this is what Connolly would have said about an issue that maybe wasn't an issue back in his day. So, you know, we have to avoid that. But I also think that, like, what Connolly's radicalism was buried for a long time, and I think he was narrowed down to be an Irish martyr. And then you can basically say, well, you know, I did learn that Connolly was a socialist but gave it up for the 1916 Rising. I think that this is what a lot of people learn. It makes sense because the Rising was to liberate Ireland, it wasn't for socialism, at least more broadly. And then Connolly's unique perspective about a rising can lead to the fight for socialist Ireland, but it can also lead to a revolutionary upheaval across Europe that he was 100% right about. Most people don't know that. Maybe everybody in this room knows, and if that's the case, that's brilliant. but a lot of people who are familiar with James Connolly or who think he's a great revolutionary icon don't necessarily know that. So the one thing he argues in that chapter about women, and he doesn't talk specifically about any particular demand, he says a fetter, and it's up for the women to decide themselves what is a fetter. So women, it seems to me, have decided that the Eighth Amendment in the South was a fetter on their participation in society. So that's not about putting words into Connolly's mouth, but it's about, I think, the way that Connolly thought about if people are blocked from full participation in society, we should support their struggle. And of course, you know, I think people will need to read what he says and then make a judgment for themselves as to where Connolly may have stood or what inspiration can you get for your struggle today based on the kind of arguments and political ideas that Connolly was putting forward. On Lily Reynolds, we were actually talking about the exact same thing earlier today and last night. And I think what Jim was saying is that a lot more research needs to be done about the life of Lily Reynolds, because we know that you know, she was much more educated than Jim Connolly when they happened to meet at a train station in Dublin when he was serving in the British Army. Now that's another thing people don't know about, that Connolly spent 7 years in the British Army serving in Ireland. It was the first. It was his. It's how he arrived in Ireland for the first time, and that's a whole separate. That's a whole discussion in and of itself. But yeah, we don't know enough, or I certainly don't know enough about Lily Reynolds. You do get the impression that, of course, you know, she was a very strong woman. She must have been a very strong woman to put up with James Connolly. They had a big family. They struggled with poverty a lot. I mean, it's amazing how much Connolly actually struggled with poverty throughout his entire life. You know, she helped Connolly develop his ability to write. I'm sure she developed his ability to think as well as a collaborator. I mean, she did think, there is, in the Donal Nevin book, which is a fantastic book, there's a lot of detail about Connolly's life, but she did say, you know, she did think it was insane that they were coming back to Ireland in 1910. She says, people are looking at us on the Atlantic liner thinking we're millionaires, because who comes back to Ireland? You know, it's only the wealthy Irish that actually make the trip back, because when you leave, you're usually, if it's Australia or United States, you're gone for life. So, you know, I don't think we can make a judgment that Connolly believed women should stay at home, because, you know, there was still the way that family units were organised at the time. There's a lot more, you know, through women's struggles and the changes in our society, there's a lot more, women are now able to play a much more central role in society. There's still a lot of obstacles, but a lot has changed in 100 years. But I think we can look at, you know, I would take inspiration from his collaboration with lots of women who were involved in all sorts of different struggles, and I would take, you know, I think what they said about Connolly is actually quite important.
And I mean, the only thing I'd add is that during the repeal campaign, there was people using Connolly and Pearce on both sides. There was posters up for and against the repeal, and both of them had Connolly and Pearce on them. So it is one of the things, and I think all we can do is, I completely say with Shaun, we can never say Connolly would have done this, Connolly would have done that. James Connolly supports Scottish independence, but we never ever say we support it because James Connolly did, because there's no evidence to back that up. So it's about what judgments we make as best we can, and exactly what Shaun's saying there, we need to try as best as we can to learn to think like James Connolly thought. That's all we can do. And one of the things that's most remarkable at Connolly was his ability to think out with the parameters that society set for him. That's one of the things, every time on all these issues, you think, my God, ahead of his time, but also he had that ability to say, actually, no, I'm not just thinking in the constraints that people are setting for me. I'm going to look at this as a revolutionist and take a position which I think is best for the movement at the time. And we need a wee bit more of that ambition, I think, for the working class. Any other questions? Quick questions?
How you doing? Talk briefly about the Conservative state reclaiming Connolly or taking Connolly's ideas. I just wanted to ask your opinion, which might play into work with people for profit. Do you think that Sinn Féin are also stealing Connolly's memory, legacy? I guess as a party that's rolling out universal credit, PIP, abolishing the industrial workers' wage, handing welfare reform to the Tories. Is it dangerous that they also play a role in Connolly, or is it just good that everybody knows about him? Just want your thoughts on that.
Well, I think, look, you know, I think everybody who looks to James Connolly has a right to claim him, but there's a way in which as well you can claim aspects of James Connolly and then ignore, you know, 90%, 50%, 30%, whatever it is of James Connolly's legacy. So, you know, I watched a recent speech by Gerry Adams when he was speaking to the Irish American Labour Coalition in the United States, and his speech was all about the contribution of James Connolly, because of course, you know, many of those people will know that James Connolly lived in America for 7 years. That's the type of organisation. The Chicago Irish American Labour Federation funded the big statue to James Connolly in Union Park. So I think it's you know, it's great that that there's a figure that can be celebrated so widely. But yeah, and again, we can't get into the business of saying this is exactly what James Connolly would have stood for. Now, this is where reading Connolly makes a massive difference, right? Because you can really say, you know, this is what Connolly represents, or you can interpret James Connolly, which is why, you know, both of us have kind of been saying over the last couple of days that if you want to understand Connolly, go and read him yourself. Don't believe what I'm saying, but if you actually read, you know, what he argued about, you know, all these questions that we're talking about, you'll find the answers about, you know, where he stood. So he makes the argument over and over again. Revolutionary action is the key way to bring about fundamental change in society. He campaigns against the idea that socialists should participate in a bourgeois government, because he believes they'll be co-opted, it'll corrupt the socialist movement, and it'll destroy the socialist movement, because you're basically managing the system for the bosses. All these things are there in Connolly's writings. You know, he never argued that first of all we achieve national liberation and then someday in the future we struggle for socialism. He actually was very, very clear that the working class struggle needed to be elevated in order to achieve national liberation and socialism at the same time. So he was very clearly against an alliance of all classes. So that's all in his writings, and I don't think you can pick and choose. That somehow in 1916 he had abandoned all that. He made it very clear in his 1914 perspective, and I think that this is crucial to understanding his role in the Rising. Was that the First World War had broken out, that this was an absolute disaster for humanity. It was going to destroy civilization, and that socialists who had committed themselves years earlier and developed a theory that would of imperialism, that understood the war was coming. He was devastated that the international socialist movement didn't follow through on its resolutions, but he said we should do everything we can to try and stop this war, including civil war. So there was a call from Connolly from 1914 for revolutionary action, which included blowing up bridges, general strikes, and armed resistance. That was his perspective in 1914, and it wasn't just about Ireland. He says, look, an uprising in Ireland, as small as Ireland might be, and as unimportant in global politics, but it can actually set off. If we have a rising here, it can lead to a bonfire of resistance that can spread right across Europe. And I think it's a fantastic vision. And I imagine him sitting talking to his comrades and saying, this is what we could do in Ireland if we are able to organise a mass movement against the war. And he spent the next 2 years then agitating for a rising, but not just in a military sense, because he campaigned in the trade union movement. He built up the Irish Citizen Army as the main revolutionary organisation of the day, and I think he did it. He went right up to 1916 with that really inspirational vision. So, I think you have to look at. We can all look around and see where people are going politically, and then I think it's about, you just said it. It's Connolly had a way of thinking about politics in the world that was, I think he was true to revolutionary principles right to the end. He never compromised with the system. He was never brought in. He never agreed with running the system. For classes that were against him. He didn't think that the working class of the North should hold off on its demands so that we don't scare off unionist big farmers from a united Ireland, just as basic examples. So I think there's lots and lots of stuff in his writings that can give you them answers. And then we can all decide then if somebody is misrepresenting Connolly's tradition.
The only thing I'd add is that all nationalist parties and left parties in Ireland, they all claim a bit of Connolly. And Connolly would have recognised that immediately, because during his lifetime, with the centenary of Robert Emmet's death, he said they all know everything about Robert Emmet's martyrdom, they know nothing about his politics, meaning they were cherry picking bits. And he said exactly the same about the United Irishmen, that he said they all talk about United Irishmen, but Wolfe Tone, he said he didn't talk about the glories of the past, he talked about the miseries of the present, meaning that they were missing out the United Irishmen talk about working class people in that class dimension. So Connolly would have understood it exactly, and he'd have recognised it. Another thing I'd say is, in my experience, you can't be too precious about these things. People quote James Connolly, people use James Connolly for all kinds of different things, and my honest view is, if I bring somebody to James Connolly and they end up reading this book, or they end up reading James Connolly and they come to a different conclusion, that's okay. That's okay. That's what it's about. And the way we're talking and debating James Connolly, the better it is. Okay, we've got time for one more question if somebody's sharp. No.
Or contribution.
Questions.
Lots of people in here who know a lot of stuff.
Absolutely. Somebody's got something to add. Yes.
Just a really small question. I was just curious. You said that the anti-repeal side of things were using Connolly. I just wondered in what way they were using Connolly to support that.
They were using it in the sense of quoting the cherish all of the children equally. They were using that quote for the proclamation, and pictures of Connolly, Pearse and other executed leaders, and quoting that bit, meaning against the repeal.
I was in Donegal just before that, and I was shocked to see these posters with Connolly and other 1916 leaders on that side of the argument.
So it just shows you, when Ireland's he's got currency and traction a bit more maybe now than he's had maybe in the past. So all campaigns, all nationalist, Republican, left organisations, they'd be using a wee bit of Connolly, and we can sort of make our own judgments about that, I suppose. Anybody else?
Just maybe one of the criticisms of Connolly in terms of how he prepared for the future, in the sense outside of Dublin City, basically. And then that also caused problems for the Labour Party and the socialist movement in Ireland of not kind of having a clear direction, because the likes of Tom Johnson and the post-1916 leadership of the Labour Party was bad on the Labour question, basically, after 1922, but also very bad on the national question as well, because they conceded on the issues for Labour and they conceded on the issues for the national unification outside of the empire, and you have to kind of wonder, well, why did Connolly not maybe cultivate some kind of leadership behind him in the ranks? And obviously, look, the man is juggling a whole lot of things, trying to build this thing in a sense almost single-handedly, but it was still unfortunate that there wasn't a more building works put in place for what was done.
I'd just quickly say that the tragedy, or one of the main tragedies of Easter Rising, is the fact that we lost James Connolly, because we didn't then get to see his theoretical and political development advance beyond, particularly into the revolutionary years that followed, not just in Ireland, but with Bolshevik Revolution and other. It would be fascinating to see Connolly's take on all these things. I also think he can take a blame for a lot. He's not taking the blame for the Labour Party, surely. No danger.
Well, I mean, I think that I was very aware of the criticisms of James Connolly being on the left. I was more aware of the criticism of James Connolly than Connolly's actual contribution, which is part of the problem, right? Because, and this is the way in which then Connolly's actual contribution gets played down. Because it's like, well, he didn't build a mass revolutionary party. He was a kind of syndicalist, and he participated in the Rising, and wasn't that a blood sacrifice that would lead to his inevitable death? And so it actually stops people from going and engaging James Connolly. So I don't want to be a cheerleader for James Connolly, but I actually think for a new generation to be able to think about Connolly's contribution, we actually have to study what he did and what he argued and why he did it, and that stuff needs to be unearthed and better understood. So yes, there's all sorts of things that Connolly could have and should have done better, and maybe what we can do is learn the lessons of those struggles so we don't repeat them. But I actually think that Connolly deserves a lot more credit for the things that he did do, and that's why I was emphasising somebody when the socialist movement collapsed. I mean, think about this. This was the first industrial war. It was barbarism. Socialists all over were thinking of, ending their lives. Their parties collapsed. They were killing each other on the battlefields of Europe. Connolly talks about what's going to happen now is that socialist soldiers are going to be murdering each other across Europe. And in the midst of all this, he develops a theory of action that actually is a way out, and he tries to lead on it and he builds on it. And he, maybe he wasn't building a political party, but he was building the ICA, and in that organisation they attracted a lot of the best radicals, around Ireland. And yes, it would have been far better if it had been built all over the country. But there was challenges that were not just about Connolly's limitations. I mean, the Irish socialist movement split because of unionism, support for the empire, and all those things. So. I think I hear what you're saying, but I actually think that we need to. Our side needs heroes, and I don't just want to be a hero or a cheerleader for James Connolly, but I actually think that Connolly needs to be put back. That his contribution to Irish politics, his contribution to Scottish politics, and his contribution really to the global struggle needs a much higher level of appreciation than it currently gets, and that's why the 150th anniversary is about doing that. I mean, when you think about the type of trade unionism that Connolly encouraged, right, along with Larkin, this was the Transport Workers Union was I think that this is even played down. I think Connolly thought there was a new Ireland coming, and that the fight that was happening in the Dublin lockout was a battle over who was going to dominate the new Ireland. Was it going to be William Martin Murphy and all the other big employers who were nationalists and patriots in Dublin? Or was it going to be the risen working class from Belfast down to Dublin? And this is why that struggle was crushed. And I think Connolly and Larkin both understood the revolutionary potential of that struggle if it won, and the impact that it would have across Ireland, but not just across Ireland, across Britain as well, where it was a debate where workers went on strike and where they actually supported tremendous amounts of aid, and where Connolly talked about, you know, the history of Ireland and England is one of contention and colonisation, but now at this point in 1913 the struggle of the Irish working class and the English working class have merged or are merging. And so I think that was his, I think that's a really inspiring vision, and I think that this is what our side needs, inspiring visions and strategic discussions as well about how to go forward. And I think that there really is a tremendous amount I think that is, you know, that Connolly has to offer right now.
Thanks, Shaun. And on that positive note, we'll end. I think from the perspective of us in Edinburgh to be involved with James Connolly stuff, the big shift that we had, the strategic turn, the return to Connolly idea 10 years ago, was about changing the focus from his death to his birth in Edinburgh and looking at his life, his whole life. And part of that was our argument that Connolly is not just a historical figure, he's a figure for our future. Society has to catch up with Connolly and his ideas. And events like this, I think, really help that. Talking about Connolly and getting a deeper understanding of his writings is absolutely vital, I think. So this book's a great contribution to that. Shaun's going to sign some of the books through the front, and I'm sure you can chat away to people, continue the debate. Shaun,
great, Jim.
It's been a pleasure.